Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we are back. I can't believe how time is flying. And yet it's, in other parts of my life, it's kind of like, oh God, shocking and everything. But in this part of my life, which just continues to be very, very clear to me and very, very important to me, we get to do this again. We get to have another story, another episode. I'm very excited about this week because I get to learn something new about yet another person. Selfishly, every episode is an opportunity for me to not only meet new people, but to learn about other people, and then often learn a little bit about myself through their stories. And in this era that we're living in, I believe that it couldn't be any more important than ever before that we all practice listening. And so I'm here for it. I'm here to offer it to our guest, Angela Tipton, today. And I'm here to hopefully be a little bit of a model for all of you. How can you have these kinds of conversations with the people in your life? And I'm going to stop rambling at this point. Let's get into Angela's story today. Angela, welcome. Thanks for being on the podcast. And let's get to know you first before we get into your story a little bit later. Tell us, how would you like to be known? And then what would you like us to know about you before we get started on your story?
Absolutely. So first of all, Paul, I'd like to thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here having this conversation with you. To answer your question, I would like to be known for who I am deep as a person. So I would describe my key values as being curious, loving family, and being driven with my goals. I think I am a very curious person at heart. I am courageous and I am kind. I believe it is very important to be kind to others and to do more than treat others the way we want to be treated. We want to treat them the way that they expect to be treated. So to some level, that goes to, if you've heard of the platinum rule, it's a step above the golden rule. And I think that when we treat each other with compassion and kindness, that the world is a much better place. So that's where I start from.
Can I actually interrupt for just a moment? Because we'll do this. And anytime I try to step into the room, you always can push me out because it's your episode. That right there, the golden rule, the platinum rule, like so many of us of a certain age have grown up with, treat others how you want to be treated. And yet that's what's cool about today's day and age is as we continue to learn so much more about the nuances of mental health, that may not always be the right way to go, right? Because we sometimes, and I talk to many people about this on this podcast, right, is how we want to be treated sometimes isn't even something we can trust because maybe we've been taught to be treated a certain way that we've come to accept. And so whatever is okay for you may not necessarily be good enough for others.
Exactly. I absolutely agree with you. And this rule, the platinum rule, you might say, is really close to my heart because I come from a place of living with a disability and I have a Crohn's disease and there are many people that deal with different conditions. And this is just something that I have to deal with. And to be entirely honest, the way someone healthy, so-called healthy, might need to be treated might be entirely different for me. And same thing when it comes to the way I might interact with other people. For instance, I'm just going to use another example. there are people that are on the spectrum, and I might treat someone that isn't on the spectrum one way, but someone that is on the spectrum might need something else entirely. And what I think
Mm,
is true to humanity, or what should be true to humanity, in my opinion, is that we learn and first start from a place of trying to understand that other person. And so, yes, what might be right for me may not be right for this other person because of XYZ circumstances. We all grow and have different upbringings, we have different challenges, we have different aspirations. We are all different people. So to say that I want to treat someone the way that I want to be treated, that's not a bad place to start from, but that also comes from a place of not fully understanding the other person. And I like to lead
mm.
with that first.
And I'll throw this in, and you can call me out, but like, if you're okay tolerating your uncle's, filthy mouth, then you can be okay tolerating somebody else's need for a little bit more patience and a
Sure,
little bit more time.
definitely.
And there we go. Like, I don't usually do that, but there it is. It's in there. People can do what they want with that, right?
Yeah.
What else, Angela, back to you, because it's your story today. What else would you like us to know about you? This is the place where you can talk about, the hobbies you enjoy, what I do for a living, or anything else that kind of you feel like defines you.
Yeah. Well, I think the focus with being here is talking about how to get off the comma, right? And I do have a very specific experience that I wanted to share. So ultimately, and let me start with this. Ultimately, what matters to me is I want to inspire people to be unafraid to challenge the status quo and to ultimately live life on their terms. And I think this gets
Mm.
kind of into that platinum rule that we were talking about, but let me just explain a little bit of what I mean
Well,
by that. And I
Well,
can,
and before you get into the story, because I'll cue you up in just a second. I just wanted to make sure you're not going to jump right into the comma just
yeah,
yet. If this is background stuff, keep going. But there's one other thing I want to do before we actually open your story
okay.
up. So, was there something else you were going to say there? Like, I kind of jumped in on you though.
No, I'm just was going to go right into my story. So
Ready? Okay.
please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get you there. One thing I like to do, though, before we jump into the 5 questions, with every guest is, as you think ahead to the next 40, 45 minutes or so of our conversation and the story you're about to tell us, what intention would you have for yourself today?
Yeah. So the intention that I have for myself is to inspire people. So to put it really simply, I want to inspire people to live a full and happy life, which to me is one of the best things that I can possibly do. I see myself as a source of inspiration to my family, first and foremost. So my two little boys are the first ones that come to mind, but then my husband, and then I have a broader circle that goes on beyond that. And the way I look at it is, if I can successfully inspire people to live life on their terms, which is something I aim to
Mhm.
do, then that, in my opinion, would make the world a much better place. I think we would be far more understanding of one another. We could be far more compassionate and loving and caring and do all the things that ultimately make the world a better place, right? But it starts with living a happier, more fulfilled life for ourselves first. If you are in a
Mhm.
good place, you are going to be in the place you need to help others, to inspire others, to be there for others. But it has to start with yourself first. And you might think that's selfish, and to some degree, you would not be wrong. But I come from a place of understanding, having dealt with my own health issues. If my health is in a bad place, I am in no position to help anyone. And so I
Mm.
have learned the hard way that you have to focus on yourself first. You have to get yourself in a good place first before you can deliver on the value that you are meant to deliver on the world. And yes, that's a big ask, but it has to start with you.
Mhm. It's I mean, it's powerful in and of itself and what you share, and it also sort of adds into and builds into the narrative that sometimes we feel selfish, or we might be told we're selfish when we're looking out for ourselves first, but it's that reveals the bigger context of it, right? Like, maybe it is selfish, and that's a neutral word until we assign value to it, but maybe it is selfish for my own purposes, but I can't help myself or anybody else until I do something with that.
Right.
You shared your intention. My intention is to support your intention by creating this space for you to share your story, and that in getting your story out there, there will be people out there who will see a little bit of themselves in you and in your story, and they'll feel a little bit more connected, a little less alone, and in the best of cases, might even feel inspired or empowered to go out and do something they've been wanting to do.
That's great.
Let's let's jump in. So the first question, Angela, is where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Yeah. So the place that I found myself on a comma, now there have been a few, but there's one in particular that comes to mind that I think is going to be most relevant for this conversation. I found myself in a really hard place after I had finished my schooling. I had acquired a vast sum of student debt that felt
Mm,
very, very difficult to get away from. I remember, now there's a few specific experiences that I'll call out. My very first experience with this is I remember after I finished my undergraduate degree, I had a very hard time finding a job in my field. And I spent a lot of time looking around. I graduated right in the middle of the Great Recession. So it was not a great time to find a
mm,
job, and certainly not a great time to find a job in my field. And I remember when my student loans kicked in to repayment, and I remember looking at the total, and I'll be honest, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but at the time it was a vast majority of what I was earning. I was earning very little. I picked up side jobs here and there to just make
mhm,
ends meet. And I realized that I could not afford that. And I had to swallow my pride. It was really painful. But I ended up calling my student loan provider and I asked to go on a graduated repayment plan. And I'll
mhm,
admit I went into it kicking and screaming because I knew in doing that I was going to have to pay a lot more in interest. And I knew in the long term it was going to
mm,
cost me a lot more. But the reality was is that I could not make the month to month. I was barely making ends meet. And I felt really ashamed. I was really embarrassed. I thought, here I went to school and I acquired the student debt. I felt as though I would be in a place to start my career and I'd be making good money. I was under the belief that I would have no issues paying back my student loans. And here I was in this place of not being capable of doing that. And yeah, I felt a lot of shame for that. That was really hard for
mm,
me to face that reality. But flash forward a few years later, finally started getting settled into my career, and I started seeing gains with promotions and things like that, natural income gains as a result of that. And at some point I went to graduate school. I went to graduate school roughly 4 years after I finished my undergrad degree and acquired, of course, even more student loans.
mm,
So yeah, flash forwarding to this place in time. By the time my husband and I, when we were done, both of us done with school, both of us went to graduate school, combined, we had over $100,000 in student debt. And
mm,
it
mm,
seemed like a gigantic number that was going to be impossible to pay off. And there was yet another very painful moment that I can recall where I was sitting in our accountant's office and I was holding a piece of paper that told me how much I had paid in the last year and just student interest. It was only interest. It was nothing towards
mm,
principal. And I looked at that number, and when I looked down at it, I realized that I could have gone on a cruise vacation with the money that I
mm,
had spent on my interest. And that was this moment of, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe that I wasted all this money on a piece of paper. I mean, yeah, sure. I had my degrees and they were valuable and everything, but I was in a sense throwing money out the door every single year. And it was not a small sum of money. It was a lot of money. So when I realized that, I thought, okay, this is it. I'm done. I'm finally in a place where I'm more stable in my career. I've been able to realize these pretty healthy gains in my income. I'm going to commit to paying this off once and for all, and I'm going to be done. And I want to be done. And so my husband and I committed together to a plan. And we knew at the time that it was an aggressive plan. It would not be easy for us to achieve our goals, but we were committed to making it happen.
mhm,
So what we did, we started with a vision board, and we still have a vision board to this day. And our vision board had all sorts of goals for us, trips we wanted to go on or experiences we wanted to have, things we wanted to do, all of these things. one of the things that we did that I still attribute to our being key to our success to this day, we started tracking our month by month totals of our student loan debt. And yes, by the time
Mm,
we started tracking it, I think I still have a picture of it somewhere, but we started at, I think it was $105,000. So this was not where we started, granted. I think we were 130 something, but by the time we
mhm,
started tracking, it was about $105,000. And every single month that we made a payment, we would track where it was at. So we were able to monitor our progress over time. And it ended up that with doing that and taking time to continue that effort, we ended up paying the last $85,000 of our student debt in just 18 months. Now, we
mm,
started very, very slow. If you look at the chart from where we started to where we ended, there were very, very small trickles at the very beginning. Towards the end, we annihilated our student debt and paid off large amounts of it very, very quickly. So something else I would say that's key to our success is that we started small. We started from where
mhm,
we were, did a little bit better every single month. You know, might have been an extra 1% here. Maybe we had a good month. At one point, yes, we did take on extra jobs, and that allowed us to put in even more into our student debt. And that's where we continued focusing. And it took a lot of time and effort, but we did it. It was not an easy feat. It was hard. There were a lot of sacrifices that went into that. But when we paid off our student debt once and for all, we celebrated and were able to
mm,
realize a lot of financial freedom as a result of that, which was a really big deal to us.
mm. Thank you for sharing that for a variety of reasons. Obviously, for just being here and sharing your story and adding it to our community, but also, I mean, this is a story about money, and I know from my own experience, and I know because of so many people who have talked to me about this, that this is kind of like it's an American thing, right? It's kind of
Yep.
taboo. We don't talk about money, especially when the money's not going our way. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for sharing that. And like, it's so interesting. Like, what was coming up for me as you were talking was these first observations that then I was thinking, like, what does that mean? What matters to you is the number for you was important to you. Nothing else matters. No comparison matters, anything. It's interesting because I was thinking, it's like, oh, 100,000. Like, I know people with three times that. Right. And so, again, doesn't matter because it's you and your amount and your number. There was another part of me too that was like, how you describe the embarrassment and the shame, and yet, your lender is probably not experiencing those things because, as you clearly already said, it's a big moneymaker for them. The interesting way that we experience our problems and our challenges that feel so, this is my word and you can correct me, makes us feel so isolated when there are other people on the outside of that kind of container or that experience who are having a very different experience with it, and it's not the same negative feelings or what have you.
Right, right. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, everyone experiences it differently. And I think if I'm being totally honest, most of us want to stick our head in the sand and just forget it. And I get that. I totally understand. Believe me, in those first few years when I was on a graduated repayment plan, as embarrassed as I am about it now, I ignored it. I just pretended it wasn't a problem. And honestly, that all that did, it didn't do me any favors. All that did was allow me to temporarily forget that it was a problem. It
Hmm.
wasn't really until I faced that problem that I was actually able to do something about it. So it's hard to face that pain. And believe me, I was not having a great time when I looked at that piece of paper in my accountant's office and realized that I was wasting that
Hmm.
much money with my student loan payments. But I needed that moment. I needed that realization to actually be able to do something about it. And if I hadn't had that moment of realization, I'd probably still be trying to figure out how I was paying down my student debt. So
Yeah. So, like, progress in the difficulty. Like, let me ask the second question. You can go back and forth, but this kind of really then kind of opens up the conversation a little bit more. But by all means, go back and forth. The second question is, as you look back at this comma you were sitting on, what did that create for you?
for me, really, it created opportunity. And I'll be honest, initially it did not feel like an opportunity. We were
Mm,
talking about that point of pain, and that was not the first thing I saw, but I did see I don't want to feel this way anymore. So opportunity was created from that. I felt this
mm,
deep shame, this pain, this embarrassment, this how did I get myself in this position? Where all of these kind of thoughts and feelings that roll through me. And but it did. Ultimately, it was an opportunity for me to change something. So yes, sitting on all this student debt was painful and it was not fun. But you know what? I learned so much in that experience, paying off my student debt. And one other thing I didn't mention that we did is we also consolidated our student debt. So
okay.
we had varying loans that range anywhere from as low as 6% interest all the way up to 10% interest. So that in itself was very costly when we paid our
Mm,
student loan interest at those rates. So reducing our interest rates to, I was about at 4%. My husband had a little less student debt than I did, so he was able to get 3%. That helped a lot. So not only did that lower the required minimum payment, it also meant that a lot less of what we were paying was going towards the interest. So by default, we were
mm,
able to pay more into the principal. So one method you can use is you can use that to do kind of what I did to get yourself ahead and make ends meet, and you can just simply lower your monthly payment. If you're in a position where you're doing okay from an income standpoint, I highly encourage just putting that extra money and pay it as if you were already paying it before. So your monthly
mm.
minimum might be less, but pay what you're paying before. That way you're paying down the principal much more. So
Mm.
yeah.
It's kind of like the whole like look at your situation and what's the greater need? Is it that I need greater flexibility today,
Right.
ergo lower payments, and or if I'm in a position of a little bit more comfort and stability there, then do I need this loan to be paid off as quickly as possible?
Right.
Then maybe more every month, and then of course the interest rate has everything to do with both of
Yeah,
those.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've been in both positions. As I said, when I had to work with my student loan provider to get a graduated repayment plan, I could not make that payment. So I didn't have the flexibility at that time to do that. But years later, I did. So
Mhm.
that's exactly what I did is instead of just paying the minimum payment, I paid what I was paying before and then some extra where I could. And then I
Mhm.
was able to pay it off a lot faster that way.
I'd love to, as much as you're comfortable with, because what's cool about this format and telling the stories is, and I shared this with you before we started recording, right? Like we all can be out here listening to your story. It's like, yeah, I get it, and we're making assumptions that we understand what you're saying, and much of human communication kind of relies on this too, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm really curious, like you brought up ashamed and embarrassed several times. And I don't want to like jump in and like, oh, let's go for the juicy stuff, right? That's not the point here. Is like so that we're not making our own assumptions about what that means for you. I don't often ask the question this way, but why shame and why embarrassment for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, those are great questions. I guess for me, so let me just maybe it helps to explain who I am as a person. I am a very goal oriented and results driven person. So I like to challenge myself. I like to push myself. I like to achieve. Those are things that are important to me. And I guess in my mind, I've always considered kind of a base level of achievement, at least when it comes to finances, is that you're able to pay your bills, right? You pay your
Hmm.
bills. You commit to this. You commit to getting your education here. You get into your you get into your career, and then you pay your monthly payment. So for me, the shame
Hmm.
is coming from a place of feeling as though I'd failed. I I
Hmm.
I made this commitment to acquire these student loans, and now I can't pay them. That to me was really
Hmm.
embarrassing because I thought, well, I'm just this giant failure then, right? At least that's what I took into myself, and that's what I told myself. And it was a hard place to be in for sure, as someone that is a very achievement oriented and someone that
Hmm.
really likes to be self sufficient. It was hard to be in a place where I felt like I couldn't sustain myself, that I could not afford even my basic monthly bills. And that to me was embarrassing. And believe me, I'm well aware that many people face that challenge, especially the way the economy is now. It's a hard place.
Hmm.
It's a hard place to be living. It's hard to make ends meet. But
Hmm.
yeah, for me, that's where that place of shame is coming from,
Yeah.
is feeling as though I couldn't do what I thought I should be capable of doing.
Well, and let's also re-acknowledge you because you just said, you understand many people, but you experienced it. You experienced it too.
Yeah.
And it seems like, so this is a little bit of a reflection. Correct me if I'm off base here, but like when you said specifically, feeling like I'd failed, like I couldn't keep my commitments, there's also, it seems, this belief that all of this was in or should have been in my control.
That was what I believed. I mean, absolutely. And you might argue that I tend to take things like that on an individual basis, or take it onto myself maybe more than I should.
Hmm.
That's there's probably some truth to that, and I'll accept that. But yeah, I felt as though I should have been able to control it, that I should have been able to get into my career. I couldn't understand, why am I struggling to find a job? I mean, yeah,
Mm.
granted at the time the economy wasn't great, but I thought, I should still be able to do this. I should be able to figure it out. So there's definitely a point of shame of not being able to figure it out, despite the circumstances. And I'm sure there are many people that can relate to that feeling.
It is interesting, right? Because so many of us do experience that in different ways at different times around different circumstances. But by its very nature, that emotion can be very isolating, right? Because
Yeah.
when I'm the one feeling it, I don't say this from a point of expertise as much as it is my own experience, right? Like there's something about that feeling that just will not let itself be shared with other people. You could be in a room full of people who are all ashamed or embarrassed, and that one is the one that's very difficult to share
Yeah.
and commiserate. I'll stop there because like I could pontificate about that. Like what about what I just said resonates or maybe prompts a thought from you? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that to us, especially as Americans, it's very hard to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable. And that's part of, being an American, is that we're expected, or we feel as though we're expected. You could call it our culture, you could call it the way we live, whatever. But I think
Hmm.
that we tend to be very individualistic about things like that. And this is something I really appreciate about the fact that we're talking more and more about mental health. This takes a big toll on your mental health. And the reality is that there's so many of us oftentimes that are experiencing these same kind of feelings of shame, of embarrassment, of, oh, I can't make ends meet. And it's really embarrassing. But at least as an American, as a person, as an individual, you often feel as though I should be able to just figure it out, right? And while yes, you can, there are often things that are within your power. Sometimes there are things that are just difficult to control, and all you can do is control what is within the realm of your control, and talk to
Mm.
someone about it. And sometimes the best thing you can do is talk to someone about it, and just understand that you are not alone with your feelings. It's easy to feel alone with embarrassment. It
Mm.
is one of those things that we just don't often talk about. But the more that I've seen people talk about it, the more honest we've gotten about mental health and how important it is, the better I think it's been for people as a whole. And I think together we can really heal ourselves, we can heal each other, but we need to be willing and to open up about those things that make us uncomfortable, and they're not fun to talk about at times. That's true, but we
Hmm.
can learn and share together, and learn that we're not alone in a lot of these feelings.
Hmm. And just because people aren't telling you that they're also experiencing it, and people aren't being as open or as comfortable sharing, doesn't mean that they're not also there with you, right? Because as we've talked about, like
Exactly.
sometimes it takes, bravery to be able to say, admit out loud. And just like we learned in school, right? Like go ahead and raise your hand and ask the question because somebody else probably has the same
Yeah.
question. But you may never hear them say that they have the same
Right.
question. Doesn't mean you don't still do the brave thing, right?
My husband, I was going to add this. My husband would call that the spotlight effect. So just for some context, my husband is a counselor.
Mm,
Really proud of his work, by the way. But
hmm.
anyways, the spotlight effect, it makes you feel as though there's this giant so it's kind of how it sounds. There's this, you're on a stage and there's this giant spotlight on you. You feel like everyone is paying attention to you, everyone is watching you. So your feelings of shame and embarrassment, you don't want to get them out. You feel like you're the only one experiencing things, but in reality, the people that are sitting in the stage around you are also feeling these. They have their own, you may not see it, but they have their own spotlights on them too, their own
Mm.
feelings where they think that they're alone and feeling this. But yeah, that the spotlight effect can do that to you, make you feel like you're alone with these feelings, feel like people are looking at you, watching you, looking at you funny. That's one of the things with being in society, right? We don't want to be the odd person out. We don't want to be the one that looks goofy or is acting goofy or behaves weird. So we want to fit in, which is understandable. So I think that's one of the things that makes revealing those feelings of shame and embarrassment so hard, is that we don't want to be
Mm.
the guy that stands out or the girl that stands out or whatever. Those are hard things to expose. Those make you feel really vulnerable, and it's hard to open up and be trusting to others and trust that
Yeah.
others are having those same experiences.
It is interesting, right? And then I'm going to go on to the third question, but it is interesting. But so, like in a way, it's almost like a reverse psychology that if enough of us talk about it, then it becomes the thing that I do to copy everyone else. And then guess what? The copying ends up being potentially kind of productive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, third question. What would you, it feels like you've shared a little bit here, but what would you add? And that is, Angela, as you look back at this comma that you've been sharing with us, what did you learn about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
Yeah, boy, I learned a lot. First of all, I learned, and it took me a while to learn this. I learned that I was not alone in feeling this way. I mean, initially, I know it sounds funny talking about it in hindsight, but initially, when I wasn't able to pay off my student loans when I just graduated from my undergrad degree, I thought clearly I must be the only one dealing with this. Why am I the only one that can
Mm,
figure this out? It took me a while, yes, longer than I'm happy to admit, but I did learn that I was not the only one feeling this way. So that was one big learning. I also learned that, I may not have been able to control that circumstance where I wasn't able to make my monthly payments initially, but over time, and we talked about this at the beginning, making those 1% improvements, I did that throughout my career and with my finances, and really just about with everything I've done. And I know it sounds hard when you're looking for this far off goal. Sometimes it sounds really hard to achieve. But you know what? If you focus on where you want to go, so what is your vision down the road? Then you think about, okay, where am I today? And be honest with yourself about today. There's no
mhm.
shame in being honest with where you're at. I know initially you might feel shame. I certainly did, but there's no shame with where you're at, really. Take where you're at and just tomorrow do 1% better. So I like to use the example of working out. So if you are not someone, and I'll use the example of running because this works for me. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be running. It could be anything. Apply this to any example that applies to you, but I'm going to use it for running for the sake. If you decide that, I want to run a marathon. If you decide to wake up tomorrow and try to run a marathon and you're sitting on the couch and you don't even walk, how do you think that's going to go? You're going to want to
Mhm.
quit within probably the first half mile, right? And I wouldn't blame you. I would want to quit too. So be honest about where you're at today. If you want to train for a marathon, so if you're starting at the couch, and there's couch to 5K programs, a lot of people have probably heard of these. So there's a lot of programs like this. So I'm not just
Mhm.
making this up, but if you are starting from a place of not walking, you hate running, whatever, but you're really committed to that goal of running a marathon, wake up tomorrow and go for a short walk. Maybe you start by just walking around the block. Maybe the next day it's 2 blocks. Maybe the day after that, you're running one of those blocks and then you're walking too. Whatever makes sense, just
Mhm.
do 1% better than what you're doing today. And another side note, you don't necessarily have to do it every day. It's just kind of the idea of doing a little bit better. And that's what I did with my career and with where my finances, I mean, I started from a place of of not being able to make my monthly payments. I had no career to speak of. I had a degree, but it wasn't doing me any good at the time.
Hmm.
And I just focused on where I was and try to do a little bit better. And then once I got settled into a career, I started looking at, okay, what's next? Where can I do a little bit better? And I kept asking myself that question. I didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I am going to be the president of this XYZ company. I mean, I could have, but who's going to hire me being a fresh
Mm.
graduate from my undergrad school? So I'd be setting myself up for failure. But I can say, you know, in 10 years, I want to do that. So what is the next step from there? I think big goals are great, but you have to be realistic about where you are today and just do a little bit better. It doesn't mean that
Mm.
you need to achieve your far off goals in the next month or even the next year. You know, maybe you have some
Yeah.
goals for a few years and you're taking little baby steps along the way. What matters is being consistent with that and just doing 1% better here and there. And I have done that through every step of the way throughout my career and with my finances. And I've been able to achieve a lot in just doing that. And as we talked about, I didn't start with very much.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to just kind of jump in and add to that. I can certainly relate to this as somebody who, um, oh man, as someone who, like, I can see the destination, and if I can't get there fast enough, then I just want to take my toys and go home. And like you said, a whole bunch of things, and I may not get your exact words, but like one, you know, you were talking about, don't expect to achieve the big goal in a month or this or that. I would like to challenge for everybody who's listening. There is no big goal that ever happens in anything less than big time. It just doesn't happen. Anybody who's ever achieved any kind of a big goal will tell you that it was 1,000 steps to get there, right? So
Mhm.
it just doesn't happen.
Right.
So quit buying, you and I have already kind of alluded to and talked about this narrative that we have as Americans about how things are supposed to be, right? So no big goal is ever achieved quickly. So just get that out of your head. And then I loved how you were sharing even something as simple as like the running or what have you. I too have been a runner, so I can relate, but like whether it's the gym, whether it's running, whether it's I'm learning Spanish right now, whether it's somebody going to school, building a new relationship, whatever, like the consistency that you were talking about. And here's what it can look like for you is that when you go into the gym or when you go into the class or whatever, and you're like, today I'm not feeling it. And I want to honor, my fatigue. And so I'm going to give myself a break today. Yes, you can do that. Not here to say that you can't. But this just popped into my head. I've never thought of this until you said it. But it's like, don't give up, give down. And I've done this before where it's like I go to the gym and it's like, first of all, we all know the whole just put your shoes on and go, and you'll be surprised. Like, just say I'm only going to be there for 5 minutes, right? And then usually you'll be there longer, right?
Right.
There have been times where it's like I'm doing the thing. I start the thing and maybe I'm doing a chest exercise or something. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to do this. And some days I'll push through and get the whole workout in. And some days it's like, nope, this ain't going to happen. Then just do one more thing. And I go home feeling defeated because I only did the one thing, but I gave down. I didn't give up, right? Like I
Yeah.
did the one thing, and that counts as consistency, right?
Exactly. The other thing I'll add to this, and I think this is also really relevant to what you're saying, is that so be honest with yourself with where you're at, but be honest with yourself where you're at on a day by day basis. And let me explain what I mean.
Mm,
So I
mm,
did start from a place of not being a fan of running at all. I actually really enjoy running now. So and what I mean by when I say be honest with where you're at on a day-to-day basis, I mentioned already that I struggle with health challenges and I have my off days. I have my good days. When I'm having an off day, it is a challenge just to get myself to go. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll acknowledge where I'm at in that given day and say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to be running for time today. The win today is simply going. I got out there, I put my shoes on, I ran for whatever distance made sense at the time. I did it. And that is the
mhm.
win. And sometimes that is enough to maintain that consistency. Now, there are other days where I might be feeling the top of my game. I had a great night of sleep. I had some really great food, whatever. I'm feeling fantastic. So I will say, you know what? I'm feeling great. I'm going to push myself today. I'm going to run for, I'm going to try to do that 9-minute, 5-mile run, whatever. And I acknowledge that, this is where I'm at today. I think it's really important for your own
Mhm.
motivation to be honest with yourself on a day-to-day basis. And truthfully, some days just getting up and going for a run, that in itself is a win. Because you
Mm.
know what? I made it. I wasn't feeling great, but I went out and I did it. Yay me. Pat myself on the back. I did it. That's great. And on the other days, I can push myself.
I want to bring it back to something you shared with us earlier when you were talking about the repayment steps. And I didn't acknowledge this earlier, but you didn't use these words, but daily visibility, right? So being honest with yourself is a part of daily visibility, right? Because you were talking about the whole, we watched that payment plan every month. We were tracking it. We were putting our eyes on it,
Yep.
metaphorically or physically, right? So this is also like a check in with yourself every day. Just don't go into just kind of like blind mode or not paying attention mode and let it happen to you. Like whatever it is, good, bad, right, wrong, more or less, whatever label you want to put into it, as long as you're checking in with it every single day, that also
Absolutely.
seems to keep the gears rolling, right? Or gears moving, whatever.
Agreed. Yeah, I could. And that's something I'd mentioned is that seeing that chart on our board every day was a huge boost of motivation. I knew exactly
Mm,
where we stood in that given moment. I just had to walk into the room and look and see where we're at. And I remember thinking that, yeah, this next month, I think we're gonna get it down to this number. And that felt good. And that, I mean,
mm,
I would encourage people to use whatever boost of motivation works for them. Everyone has their own version. For me, seeing that and encouraging myself to, okay, let's do a little better this next month, that was super, super motivating. So I'd say,
mm,
use whatever tool works for you. That worked really well for me. Again, that 1% better. Can I just do a little bit better? And you may not feel like it initially. And as I pointed out, we started really, really slow. If you look at our chart, it barely dipped off in the beginning, but towards the end,
mm.
we just annihilated that student debt, and it was amazing. And I was just doing a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a metaphor. It's not only a physical thing, it's a metaphor that no matter what you want in life, it's got to start out with small things and it's going to look insurmountable. The mountain's always biggest when you're the farthest away from it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but anyway, that may not have been the best example. Okay, let me stop there because I want to go to the next question. Angela, as you look back at the comma that you were sitting on, what changed for you as a result?
Boy, a lot. I think the biggest thing is we had talked about, I mean, of course, I learned a lot about myself and I gained a lot of skills as a result.
Mhm.
But one of the biggest takeaways for me was amount of financial freedom I was able to gain.
Mm,
So when we paid off our student debt once and for all, it meant that we had, for us, maintain the income that we had that much extra that didn't have to go towards student debt. So for us, that meant, okay, we're going to put a little bit more into our investments. We're going to take one thing I promised myself, and I didn't mention this before, but one thing I promised myself is that if I managed to pay off my student debt, I would get a yearly cruise vacation. I mentioned that my
mm.
interest was costing what it costs to go on a cruise vacation. I told myself, you know what? I'm going to go on a cruise vacation every year if I pay this off. And so far, I've committed to that. COVID was a little bit difficult to make that happen, but beyond that, that's otherwise happened. So I think takeaways for me were immense, and the biggest thing now these days is that financial freedom. It gave us the ability to do so much more. And something that is also really important to me is I very closely follow the FIRE movement. And if you're not familiar with FIRE, it stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. I like to take
Mm,
my own kind of version of FIRE with, and we'll get into it later, but I like to fire your career. I like to use a traditional career building kind of method to help you achieve FIRE. Now, I'll admit I am very focused on my career. I love what I do for work. I don't know that I'll use the retire early part of FIRE, but what is important to me is to invest in financial freedom. because what that
Mm.
allows me to do is gain freedom over my choices, to live life on my terms, to make certain risks or take certain risks that I wouldn't otherwise take. So, for instance, I made a career pivot at one point in my career. And if I hadn't gained the kind of financial freedom that I had gained at that time, I probably would have been unwilling or a lot more hesitant to take that risk. So I can take risks that I would not have been previously able to afford. And that allows me to live life on my terms, which is something to me that is super important, something that I seek to inspire others to do because it is achievable. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We talked about, that 1% better,
Hmm.
but it is something that is absolutely achievable if you commit an action plan to making it happen.
Mm. I love that, and I'm kind of circling the words in the notes. These things that really kind of resonate for me, and I'm sure they're going to resonate for a lot of folks. And this making my own choices and living on my own terms, and whether it's financial in nature, as your story, or in other ways, like this is this other thing that kind of seems to really fuel our spirit is this freedom that you're talking about too. And it sounds like those things were really, really important to you. And what I notice in your story is not just that you're talking to us about how you kind of ultimately got there, and I know there's more to say, but how difficult it was for you when you were really far away from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a long journey. And I'll admit that, if I had told myself when I graduated with my undergraduate degree that I'm going to achieve financial freedom at the time, first of all, I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what that meant.
Mm.
And if you told me that it was feasible, I would have laughed in your face and said, I could barely make ends meet. You're telling me what? I would not have even believed it was possible. So I can say that having started from being in a place, being able to make ends meet, I wouldn't have even believed it was possible at the time, but
Hmm.
it is achievable.
I want to underscore the word you just used a couple of times in a row, believe,
Yeah.
like belief, right? And just kind of like just call attention to the fact that in your story alone, you were in a place where you didn't believe things were possible. And now you're at a place where that is the belief that these things are possible and that you will have these things or do have these things. Like, that's, I think, one more thing we can throw into the what changed mix before we close with the last question is what have you not said to us already about how you shifted from believing that you couldn't to believing that you could?
Yeah, that's a good point. So what changed for me? Honestly, I started with my own education. I started to learn what was possible. The very first book I picked up that taught me that this kind of way of living was even possible was Rich Dad Poor Dad. And they don't, Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki doesn't get into fire. I think the book was made too early before that was even an idea. But he talks about alternative ways of living that even at the time that I read the book, I was very skeptical. I thought that this doesn't sound right. Um, but I read it. I was interested, made me curious, made me think, made me wonder. And I can't say that, I immediately developed an action plan to find a different way to live. I did not, to be totally
Mm-hmm.
honest. But over time, I did make those small changes, investing in my career and making different financial choices, as we already talked about. And I also continued to read other books that inspired me, that helped me understand that these other ways of living are completely achievable. And yes, that was a key thing for me to actually get me to believe, because I absolutely came from a place of not, first of all, not even knowing it was possible. But secondly, if you told
Mm-hmm.
me about it, I would not have believed it was possible. But I read these books, and I read many, many books. I have a whole list of books that I love to read, that were great inspiration. And they helped me believe that it was possible. It was not one book. It was really a collection of books that helped me believe that it was possible. And to this day, I still really love to read books like this that inspire me or help
Mm.
me understand that there's a different way to live, or sometimes that give me different tools and resources to help me apply simple, different concepts to help me up level my goals or help me work on the
Yeah.
next thing. So that really, for me, was key to even believe that was possible.
Well, and what it also sounds like you're saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that in the space between I don't believe and I do believe, you said skepticism, but I kept reading anyway. So it's the actions you took, which also kind of seems to come back to the whole just 1% every day. It seems like you kind of, it doesn't happen magically. You don't just magically change your belief in a vacuum. You do things that supports the belief you want to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ooh.
And I appreciate that you brought that up. That I like to call it, and I'm not someone that's termed this, but it comes down to your mindset. I like
Mhm.
to think of my money mindset. And yes, it starts from understanding, okay, what do you believe today? Are those beliefs serving you? Is there a chance that maybe those are untrue? There are certain things that we learn growing up from our parents. And this is one example that to me was very helpful that came out of Rich Dad Poor Dad, is that he talks about, in a sense, having a poor dad and a rich dad and just the different beliefs and behaviors and ways they live their lives. And it is really helpful to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, okay, what is my mindset telling me about what I believe about money or career or
Mm.
this or that? Or it doesn't matter what it is, but ask yourself the question, is my mindset helping me achieve my goals or is it slowing me down? And I spent a lot of time investing in my mindset, understanding my mindset, and I uncovered the fact that yeah, I had certain beliefs about money and even myself, things that were not serving me, that were not helping me, and I had to challenge some of those things. And I will admit that I did not go into challenging my beliefs easily. I was one of those that went kicking and screaming. And I'll admit that there are certain things to this day that I'm like, no, this is how it is. This is what I believe, and I'm certain that's true. But you know what? I learned that by being willing to challenge myself, including my own mindset, there were many things I could learn. And one other thing I'll share that I feel like helped me a lot is that traveling a lot and seeing different countries and different cultures help me understand that, oh wow, as you know, as an American, I have these mindsets and these behaviors and these cultures that I didn't even realize that I was adopting, but clearly is part of my behavior. Because when I went to places in Europe, oh, they do things this way. I went to on a trip to India, oh, they don't even think that way, they do this. And I just got really curious about, well, why do they think this way, why do they do this?
Mm.
And so I mindfully started working on adopting a mindset that would help me. And I will not
Mm.
pretend to say that I have it all figured out. This is one of those things that to me takes constant work. You have to
Mm.
learn and in some cases unlearn certain things that aren't working for you. But I think by coming from a place of being curious about your mindset, your beliefs, your culture, other cultures, other people, again, getting back to the platinum rule, the very first thing we talked about, just be curious and you might be surprised at the things that you can learn, and pick the mindset and behaviors where you can. It does take a lot of intention, but pick the mindset that is going to help you achieve your goals and do the best that you can to get rid of the rest. And again, I do not pretend to have it all figured out. There are certain things that to this day I am still working on, and I will openly admit
Mhm.
that. But it's one of those things that you have to be really intentional about. But it can serve you in so many ways if you are intentional about it.
Mhm. That's powerful, powerful stuff, because there's just so many things in there. But like you said, mindset, belief, perception. Okay, fifth question, and then we'll kind of bring things to a close. Angela, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Getting off the comma for me looks like being unafraid to challenge myself, to challenge my situation, to challenge the status quo, and to live life on my terms. And ultimately, that for me is to fire your career. But yeah, it starts from a place of being courageous and being willing to think and act a little differently. It might serve you in ways that truly inspire and surprise you.
Obviously, 45 minutes to an hour is not enough time to really go all the way into all the things that we could explore. And there's so many different pathways we could have opened up with more questions, but we'll bring this to a close. And before we wrap, again, thank you for sharing your story with us today. As folks are curious about you and maybe want to hear more of your story, see what you're up to, or maybe even reach out to you, where can people find you? We'll put all the links in the show notes. Walk us through it.
Great. So one of the best places to get routine updates from me is I have a website called Fire Your Career, and I do have posts that go up on a weekly basis. I'm always sharing new tips and resources and things that I come across that have helped me. And I readily share that knowledge. So that's the best place to find me. I encourage people to also follow my newsletter, and links are on my website as well. And I have a free ebook called 7 Ways to Fire Your Career. It's a really handy guidebook to really just help you start that journey if you're committed to doing something like what I did. So yeah, all sorts of places to find me. I'm also on social media. You can follow me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. So yeah, and I know you'll have all the links that people can follow.
Awesome. Excellent. And then Angela, the last thing we do before we wrap is, obviously, every episode is about people sharing their story, sharing their experience. And this is all about, giving people a voice. And so your story wouldn't be complete today if we didn't give you an opportunity to share other people's voices. And we call this section acknowledgements. So it's your opportunity to give a boost to, or lift up, or, give some publicity to folks, causes, organizations that matter to you. So that can be charities, causes, organizations. It could also be other creators or people within your circle, family, loved ones, etc. So as you look at your story and your circles, who would you like to acknowledge today?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I want to acknowledge my husband and my 2 little boys that have inspired me in so many ways, and they've inspired me to demand better for them first, but also for myself, to see the possibility for better and see the potential for all the things that we can do. So I give a lot of credit to them for inspiring me endlessly. And they are my source of support and inspiration. Another one that came to mind, I know we touched on this very, very briefly, but one organization that is close to my heart is the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. They are working on investing in research towards a cure for Crohn's disease. They also provide a lot of support to people that have Crohn's disease, and that is an organization that I closely follow. Yes, I do struggle with Crohn's disease, and I'm hopeful for a cure one of these days. We'll see. But yeah, they are an organization that I think there are many organizations that are committed to a great cause, but that's one that's definitely near to my heart and very personal.
Yeah. And like you said, part of your story. So we'll make sure to get the link to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation in the show notes. Definitely encourage folks to check that out, because you're not the only one. Many people know folks in their families who are currently experiencing that. Or I think probably what's also true is many people know people who are about to find out that that's going to be them as well. So given the way that we live, well, definitely worth checking out. And thank you for sharing that part of your story with us as well. I know you did mention it earlier. We didn't really get an opportunity to go down and explore, how that showed up in your life, but folks can learn a little bit more about that through your links and your contact info. Angela, thank you again. I will definitely look forward to following your story and encourage folks to check you out. And just so appreciate you coming on here and sharing this very, very kind of timely and relevant story with us today. And wish you all the best in your ongoing journey.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate the chance to be here. It's been great to talk with you.
Nice. Have a great weekend ahead. What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma. And feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.